So we're going to go ahead and have our second devotional for this week. Today's is Isaac, or Yitzhak. So let's go ahead and just start with our Siddur. I pray you, Yitzhak, exalted guest, that all the other exalted guests may sit here with me and you, Abraham, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, and David. Let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about Yitzhak. Now, this might sound strange, but he is actually one of my favorite characters in the entirety of the Torah. And I actually consider him something of an unsung hero. Now, you might ask yourself, why do I consider him an unsung hero? He's one of the patriarchs. How can it get much better than that? And the reason I say that is because when I think of the stories about Yitzhak, we've got so many stories about Abraham, we've got so many stories about Yaakov and Yosef and Moshe, but Yitzhak, usually the stories are limited to him being sacrificed on the mountain, and then him with Yaakov, and being blind and having to pick between Esav and Yaakov, and even then, you could say those are really the stories of his father and his sons. Yitzhak doesn't get many stories by himself, but that's exactly why I appreciate him just so much. You see, he may not have had the most exciting life, but he had a sanctified life. A life that was fully consecrated from the time that he was offered on Mount Moriah all the way till his last breath. Because he was the only one of the patriarchs who spent his entire life in the land of Canaan, in the Promised Land. The only exception being when he was a child, his father went up to Egypt, or went down to Egypt and then came back. But since he took over the camp, he never leaves. And also he spends most of his early life in the land as well. And once again, the reason for this is because he was offered as a sacrifice as a young man. He lives a specially consecrated life. And we have a lot that we could learn from Yitzhak. He never settled down and built cities, but he continued the life and legacy of his father Abraham. In fact, one of the few stories we get that's really just about him is an episode with maintaining his father's wells. They had been filled in, and he gets them dug back up. Not exactly a story we put into children's Bibles, because it may not be the most exciting story, but I think it says a lot. He continued the legacy of faith. He wasn't a man who started. He wasn't a great mover and shaker, but he was solid. And he continued the good things that had been handed down to him. His son Yaakov, he's going to be over here. He's going to come back. He's going to go to Egypt. He's going to have a crazy dysfunctional group of sons who are righteous, but also it's not a peaceful life, Yaakov. It starts with struggle and it ends with struggle. Maybe not so much, but it's defined by struggle. Not so Yitzhak. In fact, if we look at the relationship between Yitzhak and his half-brother, Ishmael, it seems that their only real interactions together, they're getting along just fine. I think that we could learn a lot from Yitzhak. Because when I look at, especially at the Messianic movement, it's so young in some ways. It's only 150 years old or so, and it's so exciting. People want to come in and they want to be major movers and shakers. And I think that's one of the reasons you see people who put on the excessive costumes, and they're trying to make it as exciting and as bold as possible. And I think that there's a lot more to be said, once again, about quiet service, about serving behind the scenes. Maybe not the rabbi who's wearing a prayer shawl, or the cantor who knows what they're singing. Could be something traditional, or it could be something contemporary and kind of strange. Who knows? But I'm a lot more concerned with those solid people who are working behind the scenes. The people who help with the kitchen, the people who help with the vacuuming, the people who help with the paneling on the walls. You get the idea. There's a lot to be said about that. We're just going to live a consecrated lifestyle, and we're here just to serve and continue what has been handed down and handed off to the next generation, so that what we were given is not lost. And Messianic Judaism, because it came back to life in the last 2 centuries, it has like this incredible Jewish legacy, but it also has now a Christian heritage. It's got both. And I tend to side toward the Jewish legacy because I think, let it stay what it is. At the same time, we cannot deny the last 2,000 years and admit that a great deal from the Christian world has come into it. And rather than try to scare it away, I say, well, let's receive the good and continue the good aspects of that Gentile Christian legacy, but at the same time, fully embrace that Jewish identity. We can't have both. And I think some congregations go toward one or the other, but can we just be found responsible? Can we be found working what we have, making sure it's maintained well, and taken care of? One more thing that I'll say about that, about Yitzhak as it pertains to Sukkot, is that this is a sanctified time. Just like Yitzhak was fully sanctified. He served Hashem his entire life. No serious dramas. Keep in mind the season, and let's make sure that it is fully sanctified, that it is lived out in the holiest fashion possible. Understand that we have our visitors and we have our ushpizin, but understand that also we're here to observe the divine presence of Hashem. And so while we're going through Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, and David, let's also not forget that the real observance here is what can we learn from these 7 great figures to bring us closer to God. So make sure that this time is spent in true holiness as we're under the skak and as we wave our lulav and we've got our etrog here. Let's make sure that we are living like Yitzhak, our ancestor, and making the most of our time living in tents, or in booths in this case. I'll see you tomorrow. Chag Sukkot Sameach. Make sure just to enjoy your day. Try to have a meal here in the sukkah. And be sure to shake a lulav.